Welcome to EoZTV. I'm Elder,
Mrs. Elder.
and today we are honored to be able to have an actual interview. This is the first interview we ever have on EoZTV. We have almost in the studio, in the virtual studio, we have Tammi Rossman-Benjamin of the AMCHA initiative. Welcome, Tammi.
Hello there. It's great to be with you.
Thanks. The AMCHA initiative just came out with a really important study. What it's done is, in the past, is documented lots of cases of anti-Semitism on campus, and it's really almost exhaustive. A really, really tremendous amount of research is done by the AMCHA initiative and spearheaded by Tammi. Why don't you just, can you just give a quick description of the initiative, and then we can go talk about the new report?
Sure. Our organization is called the AMCHA Initiative, and our organization was established a few years ago, and our mission is to monitor and investigate, educate about, and combat campus anti-Semitism across the country. So the study that we undertook to do was to actually look at anti-Semitic activity in 2015, so to do sort of a retrospective of the year, looking at incidents of anti-Semitic activity on campuses that were most popular with Jewish students. So we actually went to the Hillel's list of 120 of the public and private schools across the, actually they also included Canada. We excluded Canada, but they came up with 120 schools that have the largest Jewish student populations, and we decided to look there because those are the schools that Jewish students and Jewish parents and the Jewish community care the most about. And we wanted to do something that actually has never been done before. So in a way, what we've done is actually quite innovative, because what we've seen, what we know, is that there's been a real increase in anti-Semitic activity over the last few years. And there have been studies, there have been a few studies. In fact, we actually did one of those studies that actually looks at student subjective reports about anti-Semitic activity. Trinity College and Brandeis Center, and then Brandeis University. And then, as I said, we did a study looking at UC schools. The other two surveys were national surveys looking at Jewish student responses about anti-Semitism on their campuses. And they found that, yes, there was a tremendous amount in the Trinity study. 50% of the students reported anti-Semitic activity, having witnessed or experienced anti-Semitism on their campuses. And in the Brandeis University study that came out a few months ago, they found that I think it was 3/4 of the students, so 75% of the Jewish students that were surveyed, said that they had heard at least one or more anti-Semitic expression in the prior year.
Do you know how much it might have increased in recent years? Do you have earlier studies that you can compare to?
Our sense, again, because there has not been, we have not that many studies. Even of the subjective surveys, there haven't been that many. But we know that just from our own, I would say, informal or my intuitive sense of what's happening is that, yes, that we really have seen an increase in anti-Semitic activity. I am actually a lecturer at UC Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz, since 1989, and absolutely in the last, certainly since the second Intifada, since at least the beginning of 2000, 2001, there was a huge spike. And then since, I would say, since the sort of the beginning of the BDS movement that really took hold a few years ago on college campuses across the country, it's really spiked enormously, and it really has a lot to do. We really know, and students have suggested, that a lot of what they're experiencing has to do with these BDS activity and anti-Zionist activity altogether, more generally. And so we knew that going into this study. And so what we decided to do was to look at things from a more objective perspective, to actually, instead of asking students and asking sort of a representative sample of students, to actually go into X number of schools, and we decided to go into, as I said, the 120 or so schools that Hillel had identified as being those with the largest Jewish student populations, and just looking at every single incident that we could find, either that had been reported to us directly or that we had found through the media, that had been reported in the media, or that we could do research into ourselves, and to come up with what was, to the extent that we could measure it, the most comprehensive measure of anti-Semitic activity at each of those 100 plus schools that have the largest Jewish student populations.
Okay,
so it's a kind of objective measure.
No, sorry. So essentially, though, what the real import of the study is not only documenting the anti-Semitism, but it's making a correlation between the anti-Semitic activities that you have discovered together with the incidences of BDS and also, interestingly, the existence of professors that are against Israel, that support a boycott of Israel.
Correct.
Can you go?
Correct.
Can you define these categories? I have the table number 2 in front because I think it's fascinating.
Sure.
Can you just describe what these categories are and pretty much what we're seeing on this table?
Absolutely. So we decided that there were really different kinds of what we were considering anti-Semitic activity, and we wanted to single them out and make them sort of discrete categories. Not only so that we could understand the phenomenon better, we could really understand the nature of the anti-Semitic activity, but we could look at the relationship between different aspects of that activity, the relationships between one another, and other factors such as whether the presence or absence of an anti-Zionist student group like Students for Justice in Palestine, or the presence and number of faculty who have endorsed an academic boycott of Israel, for instance. So the way that we divided up anti-Semitic activity was into 3 different categories. One category of incident, or one aspect of that incident, involved what we called targeting Jewish students for harm, which meant directly impacting a Jewish student or targeting an action towards a Jewish student because of their Jewishness or their perceived support for Israel.
Okay.
And we talked about, and we're talking about actions such as physical assault, discrimination, suppression of speech, destruction of property, things that we can all accept are harmful actions directed towards Jewish students.
Can you give a couple of specific examples of the types of, like 2 or 3 examples of the incidents targeting that you've seen?
Well, we've seen assaults on Jewish students. We've seen where Jewish students are pushed or shoved or physically harmed. We've seen verbal assaults where they're yelled at, you dirty Jew, you should go to the gas, Jews should go to the gas chamber, but directed at individual students. We have lots of suppression of speech. We have many Jewish student events that are disrupted and shut down. It's a very recent and very troubling phenomenon that I'm sure you've heard quite a lot about.
Okay, so very good.
Discrimination. We have discrimination. We have several examples, actually 3 examples that I can think of right off the top of my head that are actually quite high profile, where Jewish students who are either in student government or running for student government are actually discriminated against and told that somehow or other they were acting according to a Jewish agenda and therefore could not do something. In the case at UCLA of Rachel Beda, a Jewish student who was running for the Student Judiciary Board, she was at first rejected or voted down because of her presumed Jewish identity or the fact that she had affiliations with Jewish organizations such as a Jewish sorority. Same thing happened or a similar thing happened at Stanford University with a student who was running for student government. And something similar happened at my own university at UC Santa Cruz, where a Jewish student senator was told that he should not vote for he should abstain from voting on the BDS vote, on the divestment vote, because of his, quote, Jewish agenda, unquote.
Okay.
So we have examples of that. And again, these are examples of what we call targeting Jewish students for harm. These are examples that I guess fit the sort of the classic sense of, you're hurting Jews, that's anti-Semitism. We also, though, have a category that we call anti-Semitic expression, which is by and large speech, but sometimes it's images that are not directed at not necessarily targeting Jewish students for harm, but they are just expressions. But they're expressions which fit into one or more of 8 different categories that we've derived directly from the U.S. State Department definition of anti-Semitism. For instance, comparing Jews to Nazis, condoning terrorism, demonization of Israel or delegitimization of Israel. These are categories of speech or rhetoric or language imagery that the State Department considers in its definition of anti-Semitism, that the State Department considers anti-Semitic. And when they're monitoring anti-Semitism in countries around the world, this is the definition that they use in order to determine what constitutes anti-Semitism. And so we had a category that we called anti-Semitic expression, which categorized incidents according to whether they fell into one or more of these 8 categories. And then there was a third category, which was simply BDS activity, either votes or statements in support of BDS activity, or some kind of BDS-related action or statement.
When you say statement, there could be statements every day. So when you say statement, you mean like from a student government, or from what exactly do you mean by statement?
If it was a student government, generally student governments engaged in votes, and so that was considered a BDS activity, was a vote on a divestment resolution. But when an SJP group put out a statement in support of its divestment resolution, the one that it had written and promoted in the student government. So that statement itself was a statement, was an example of a BDS activity. Endorsing those statements when a faculty body would endorse a statement, a divestment statement, or some kind of BDS statement at their school. So that was considered a BDS activity. When a speaker at an event would be promoting BDS in their talk, so that would be also considered BDS expression or BDS activity.
Okay.
So we separated those things, again, we separated those things out so that we could look at the interaction among those 3 different things, among the targeting, anti-Semitic expression, and the overall anti-Semitic, and then the BDS activity. And then we also looked, I think I said before, of 2 other factors. One was the presence or absence of an SJP group, Students for Justice in Palestine, or some similar group, and also the presence and number of faculty, ranging from anywhere from 0, but 83% of the schools had at least 1 faculty member, to 50. We had a few schools that had up to 50 faculty boycotters.
Okay, well, we'll get to the other. We're going to get to the other chart later. I just wanted to quickly eyeball this one because I think what's important over here is the correlate. Really, the 2 last columns are probably the most important ones, because you add together the first 2 columns are the targeting and the expression. You're adding those together for the 4th column, and the 3rd one is the BDS activity. So I think what you're trying to show over here is that the campuses that had the highest number of BDS activities corresponded very, very strongly with the ones that had the highest overall anti-Semitic. You could see Northwestern was the highest in anti-Semitic, 2nd highest in BDS. Santa Cruz, the opposite, highest in BDS, 2nd highest in anti-Semitic. Berkeley was 3rd highest anti-Semitic and like the 6th or 7th highest in BDS. So it really is a remarkable correlation that we can see just by looking at this last 2 columns on this chart. saying that, showing like, Oberlin and all the, Hunter, whatever, all of these things. Columbia comes out roughly the same. I mean, it really is a remarkable, correlation of, the worst, the campuses that have the most BDS really do seem to have, under your definition, the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents.
Right. Well, that's true. That is true. And I think, again, we want to look at, because all three activities actually were considered within the overall anti-Semitic activity. But I think the most striking one, because when we talk about the targeting of Jewish students for harm, that is the category that actually, or the kind of activity that actually most closely aligns itself what we're considering anti-Jewish hostility, and what really does create, I think, for Jewish students a very hostile environment. The more targeting, the more hostile that environment is for Jewish students. When incidents are directed at them, towards them, and what we're seeing more and more, particularly with BDS, and I explained why that might be in the report. We see a movement away from just not from just sort of directing animus towards Israel, towards directing animus towards anyone who supports Israel on campus, and that means Jewish students. And so what we're seeing, and so to me, maybe the most compelling correlation. The most compelling relationship is between BDS activity and the targeting of Jewish students, because that really does say that it's BDS activity that is creating quite a large amount of hostility for Jewish students on college campuses across the country.
So did you do anything to establish causality here, or is it, because obviously this is a correlation, but is it possible that maybe these campuses were pre-existing anti-Semitic and that's what made them do more BDS, or is it fairly clear to you that BDS is what brought this anti-Semitic activity along with it?
I think it's quite clear, because a lot of I would say a number of maybe half of the targeting incidents actually happened in direct relationship to some BDS related activity, right? So when the students are shutting down, let's say, an event, or trying to shut down an event that Jewish students had worked very hard to put on, and they do it, and they, in their shutting down of the event, they're also calling for BDS, or they're doing it in solidarity with the BDS. They're shutting down, right, because part of the BDS movement, part of the BDS assumption, but their principles are that you can't allow any kind of Zionist event or narrative to actually be expressed on campus. So that's what the boycott is. It's shutting it down. It's shutting it out. And so sort of concomitant with that are, really shutting down any speech that's presumed to be Zionist, or have any kind of affiliation with Israel or some pro-Israel stance.
And in fact, BDS doesn't really. Officially, BDS would not be against speech, but you're saying effectively it is, because they're not just against Israel; they're against things.
Exactly, BDS is against speech. BDS is against anything that would bring the Zionist narrative, or anything that was anything but the BDS narrative or the anti-Zionist narrative.
Right, but that's my point, is that they claim that they're only against Israel, but in fact they're against expression, they're against speech. When it comes down, that's exactly right. And so that comes out. That actually has a name. They call it their anti-normalization campaign, and it's part of the BDS campaign. It's to shut out everything, to shut down not only any exchange with academics, and to shut off any relationship with Israeli universities and scholars, but to actually shut down Israel abroad programs. So students who want to go for their junior year to Israel, like they could go to France or to Egypt or to any one of many dozens of countries. There's an explicit
campaign to actually shut that program down on campuses across the country, to shut down the birthright program. That Jewish students, take advantage of in great number across the country. But there's an explicit campaign called the Birthright Campaign, whose goal is to shut down those programs. So these things really impact Jewish students. So it's not a surprise that the more BDS activity you have, the more you really incite hatred of the Jewish state and anyone who supports it in the campus community, and the more you have people willing to engage in efforts to completely silence, delegitimize, and marginalize Jewish students on the campus, and it results in things like hurting Jewish students, like assaulting them and discriminating against them and destroying their property. So it's not it's pretty much a no-brainer in terms of causality. I mean, yes, we all know that correlation does not mean causality, but in this case, it's really quite a no-brainer that BDS is really inciting harm to Jewish students.
And just to make sure that I have my very rusty statistics knowledge, up to speed, this table is showing any number above 0 shows some level of correlation. In other words, if there was a negative correlation, it would be a negative number. So all of these, these 6 different things that you're saying over here: anti-Semitic activity, expression, BDS, targeting, the existence of the Jewish anti-Zionist groups, and the faculty boycotters, all are sometimes very strongly and sometimes slightly less strongly, but all are fairly strongly correlated on campus. Is that, do I get that right?
Very strongly. I mean, what you need to do is to look at that number up at the top that says P, right? P is less than 0.001. It means the probability is 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000, or actually it was much, much less than that in many of the cases. It was even less than 1 in 1,000. But the probability is extremely low that these things are related by chance.
Right.
Meaning these things are definitely associated. There's no doubt that BDS is associated with overall anti-Semitic activity, with anti-Semitic expression, with the targeting of Jewish students for harm, which as we said, we ran what's called a multiple regression, where you can actually look at different factors and how each one of them contributes to being able to predict some variable. And in this case, we looked at it with respect to the targeting of Jewish students for harm. And we looked at each of those other factors, and we looked at to what extent can they predict the targeting of Jewish students for harm. And we found that the best predictor by far was BDS activity.
I got a quick question for you. Be it as it may that you have all these statistics, have you guys gone to the next level to show what we can do to help minimize this activity, or at least help this situation?
Well, that's a great question. One of the ways that we want to use this is to make the case at universities across the country, and we're already trying to make this case at the University of California, and we're actually making a lot of progress with this, that there really is a relationship. Because right now, university administrators, but not only them, pretty much, anyone in authority, whether it's in universities, but also at the state level, and even at the federal level, have not yet accepted what, let's say what the State Department in its definition of anti-Semitism has actually acknowledged, which is that there is really a clear relationship, an unambiguous relationship between certain kinds of anti-Israel expression, let's call them anti-Zionist expression, and anti-Semitism. That we claim that these are one and the same thing, that anti-Zionism, there's really no doubt that it is sort of what we call the new face of anti-Semitism. It is the new anti-Semitism. But it also causes anti-Semitism. It causes classic anti-Semitism. It causes harm to Jewish students. But acknowledging this and then using that acknowledgement to be able to address the problem, that hasn't happened yet. And so what we need to do with, and we feel that our study is a really important tool in being able to raise awareness and being able to make the case. What we've had before, as I said before, the studies that have shown really high levels of campus anti-Semitism across the country have been based on subjective reports. What we do is to really back that up with empirical, statistical, objective evidence. And so now to make that case, I think that we will, and we want to reach out to everyone to be able to make that case to university administrators, to, to your state and federal legislators, that it's really important. I'd say the first step is to try to get all of these, all of the universities, but all of the state agencies and federal agencies as well, not just the State Department, but let's say the Department of Education, that's looking into complaints of anti-Semitism on campuses. If they're not looking at a campus using the State Department definition and understanding that certain kinds of anti-Israel expression are actually anti-Semitic, then they're not seeing what Jewish students are feeling. So the first step is to actually have a really clear standard to be able to measure anti-Semitism. And we believe that at this point in time, the best standard is the State Department definition, although it could be any definition that acknowledges that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
I'm going to jump in for a second. And what I was going to say is I'm going to try to bring this to something tangible, because because of how nice of a job you did, what I want to do is try to translate what you did to actually make it possible. For example, this is just an example. If I go out and tweet every single university and try to get over to every single Jewish group on every single university to make them aware of what the situation is and what they can do, I want to find out, for example, can I get a list of all the universities, all the Twitter accounts? I just want something tangible that we can go out and say, hey, here's what you could do to help. You know what I mean? What can we have for the people who are listening to tangibly go out and do? And even if I have to help you organize it to get the information out, that's fine. But we need to actually bring it into what can actual end users, if you will, forgive my terminology, but just people who are in different locations that are willing to help, what can be done.
Right. I think your idea is a great one. I think being able to take this study and to use it, and will definitely help you put together a package that can be used at basically any university. Again, I think the first step is to say this really shows the nature and scope of the problem, that it is by and large being fueled by anti-Zionism and by BDS activity in particular, and that the first step is adopting a clear definition of anti-Semitism. We recommend the State Department definition of anti-Semitism, and then to ensure, and this is all what anyone, sort of a grassroots activism group, alumni, other stakeholders, parents, community members, anyone who has some relationship to a university, even if it's just as a taxpayer, should be able to make the case that the university needs to adopt a standard of anti-Semitism, and also to address, and this is really critical, to address anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic activity, including anti-Zionist expression, with the same promptness and vigor as they do every other kind of racial, ethnic, gender bigotry.
Amen.
Right? That's
Amen.
the key. The key is the fair treatment. We're not asking for privilege. We're not asking for more, but nor do we want less. So whatever way the university deals with racism, with homophobia, with sexism, with Islamophobia, those are the ways that the university needs to deal with anti-Semitism. And they need to deal with anti-Semitism as Jewish students experience it, not as they want to believe it is, right? They can't go to Webster's, old dictionary and look up anti-Semitism. Well, that's what it says here. That's what it, no. What we're saying is that anti-Semitism has got to include anti-Zionism. And if it doesn't, it's just not accurately identifying what Jewish students are experiencing, and you'll never be able to address the problem, and it's just going to get worse and worse. So that's what I think people can do. There has to be accountability on the part of universities, and And we, those of us who have a stake in these universities, the general public, the taxpayer, the parents, the students, the alumni, the donors, legislators, everyone who has a stake in our universities needs to bring this information to the attention of university administrators, and then to pressure them, to find ways to pressure them to actually do what we need them to do, which is to treat us like everyone else.
Well, I got some ideas, and so what I'm thinking about doing is that we'll use this show, and we'll ask any of the listeners and any of the readers to please write into us. And what we will try to do is try to put a formula, to make it a little bit more formal, to make it so that we can give you tangible ideas of what you can do to get involved. So make sure that you write into Elder, and I will go ahead and spearhead this to help you out on that. And then I'm going to pass it back to Elder.
Okay. Well, no, this has been great. Thank you so much, Tammi. This has been very informative. And again, you really, I thank you very, very much for joining us here.
And what I was going to say is make sure that we have all the documentation, and we'll make it available for everybody.
I mean, the report is on your website, I assume, right?
Absolutely, the report, an executive summary of the report, and also all the data. We have a tracker that keeps track not just of those 100+ schools that we looked at in the study, but at several hundred schools, 350 schools across the country for anti-Semitic activity. So the same data, raw data that we use for this study, you could also find that on our website as well.
Well, thank you very much. And for now, I'm Elder.
Mrs. Elder.
And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Take care.